Thanks so much for being here this morning, Jasmine. I know you've been to this event before, but this is the first time we've had you on stage. One of the reasons, obviously, we're going to get to Brexit, but one of the reasons that I think you're such an interesting figure in the business world is because you've kind of had two different stages, or two different paths in your career. You started out in business, and then you transitioned into an international development role earlier in your career. I'm curious about that transition. Can you kind of tell us where you were at that stage and sort of what prompted you to make that change and how it ended up sort of panning out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, I think I'd always had an idea, and even as I left university and went into business and had my career move from marketing into general management, and a little idea in the back of my mind that it'd be great if I could sort of channel all of that energy that I was putting into a business environment, into, we just heard about it this morning actually, trying to make the world a little bit of a better place. And when I was starting out, it was more unusual for businesses to talk about that kind of thing. And you know, we were really focused on all the businesses I worked for. I worked for a startup in the States, I worked for Thomson Financial. It was really all about the money. And there was much less talk about purposeful business. And so when I got the opportunity to go and channel my experience that I'd got up until that point and the skills that I'd learned into working for an organization that had a mission to try and address poverty in the world and move as I did to West Africa with my young family, I just thought, wow, you know, a lot of people think about doing this sort of stuff, but I'm actually going to do it.
Right. And obviously you followed that course to become CEO of Save the Children, a job you left a few years ago. I'm curious about, you know, someone in that position today, in today's business world, where there is more of a focus on doing good as part of doing business. What advice you might have for someone who's looking for more purpose in their life and what sort of path they might consider taking?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about, in many cases, not always and not in all countries, but it's much more common now for young people who come and talk to me, and both women and men, and they're thinking about what they want to do in their careers. And they don't have to make that choice between, you know, I want to make a difference in the world, but I also, you know, have got my family to support, I want my career to take off, so I don't know whether to go and volunteer or whether to... Actually, now there are the opportunities to work for business and, yeah, sure, look after shareholder value, but do that by thinking about how that's created in a sustainable way, and often that's by thinking about what's sustainable for the world.
Right. What do you think has led to the business focus on that? I mean, as you mentioned, there is some shareholder pressure, but what other factors do you think have played into that?
The big thing I noticed actually when I was working for Save the Children, the shift I noticed was yeah, in the last probably decade and a half, where young people started coming into businesses and they were actually demanding it. So we had, at Save the Children, we had businesses like Boston Consulting Group, Egon Zehnder, Freshfields, the big legal company, all giving us literally millions of pounds worth of pro bono support. And the reason they did it, they were very upfront, is because that enabled them to attract the talent, attract and retain the talent that they needed to be the best that they could be. Because the idea would be you do well, you deliver for your clients, and you may get a chance to work on the Save the Children account. And that's what they were looking for.
Wow. So let's speed up to present day. You're CEO of London First, a job you took in October 2016, so shortly after the referendum vote. Can you, I think London First has a really interesting history. So can you kind of explain what the organization is and your role in leading it?
Sure. So London First was formed in the early 90s, when London was really in the doldrums. It's hard for us to remember that. I was actually in the States at the time, but I'm a Londoner, and I do remember that. I mean, you know, our London transport, we like to complain about it, but it was in a very bad shape back then. London schools were failing. There was no overall leadership for London. The then Prime Minister, had just abolished the GLC, which provided overall leadership. And there was no foreign direct investment. We were really at the bottom of the league tables on that front. And a group of, very small group of business leaders at the time got together, probably over a lunch or a breakfast, that's kind of lost in the mists of time, and said, we need to do something about this. You know, we need to lean in and we need to do what we can. We're traveling around the world with our businesses. We can talk up foreign direct investment. We need to talk to the government about London getting a CEO, they called it. Actually, what they meant was a mayor. And we need some powers devolved to London to provide overall leadership. We know about Teach for America. We've seen that. Why don't we bring that over, incubate it in our little office here and create Teach First and to help London's failing schools. And let's get business behind what was then Crossrail, now soon to open later this year as the Elizabeth line, and show that business can help to pay for that and persuade government to get it out of the sidings in the sort of too difficult piles. So it was a very pragmatic, business-oriented approach to solving, not the whole thing, but picking off particular issues that could really make a difference and help make London much more competitive.
Right, so obviously London is at a very interesting point in its history with the Brexit debate ongoing, and you took the job, as I mentioned, just a few months after that vote. You told me last year that one of the pieces of advice you once got is that you shouldn't take a job unless you're a little bit scared of it. So I'm curious what scared you most about this job that you have now?
Yeah, I mean, people often say, gosh, you know, you were running a huge global international organization and now you're running a little business campaigning organization. Why did you make that switch? I suppose for me, what was challenging, what was the scary bit was the referendum result and that moment of jeopardy that I felt that London was in. As a Londoner, you know, I'd grown up loving London, really very excited to see the kind of changes that over the last 2 decades, it really has risen to become, you know, one of the top cities in the world, not just for business, but for people on many different ways of measuring it. And I really didn't want to see London kind of say, some people were out there saying, oh, London's had its day, it's all going to be downhill, and we're going to be back to the 90s before you know it. Other people were saying, oh, we've got this wonderful ecosystem, and you know, we can just relax, nothing's ever going to happen to London. And I'm quite an activist, and I felt that, no, we have to do something about this. And I saw that London First had this great platform of, you know, it had grown from 4 business leaders to, you know, 240, and there is a role for business leaders in particular to kind of use their voice, their assets, their clout to try and address the things that can be addressed when our capital is in jeopardy. And I also felt quite strongly that although they'd been very successful in putting London at the top of the global charts, they kind of lost sight, in fact we all lost sight a bit of London being the UK's capital, and how is it connected to the rest of the UK? And how do people living elsewhere, you know, in far-flung corners of the UK feel that this is our capital and worth fighting for, rather than some London elite that's nothing to do with them? So I felt that there was an opportunity to try and make a difference.
Yeah, on that last point, I'm curious about what you, obviously the outcome of the vote, you can sort of see in some parts of the UK, obviously a big divide between urban centers and elsewhere. And so I'm curious how you, from your position, how you think you can sort of heal that rift between London and what might be the rest of the UK.
Well, one thing that we can do as a business organisation is we started to make connections with, in a much more strategic way than we had done, with other business organisations around the UK. So with the Northwest Business Leaders team, with the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, with Business North, the Midlands Engine. So there are kind of similar types of setups to our organisation, all a little bit different in different metro areas around the UK. And business doesn't see that divide that we all hear about in the media of, you know, whoa, it's London versus Liverpool, you know, more Liverpool must mean less London. Business doesn't see it that way. You know, most of our members, although they become members because it's critical for their business that London continues to thrive, they don't want that to be at the expense of the rest of the UK. You know, they have offices in Birmingham or in Aberdeen, and they see their people moving between those offices, and they want to bring the country together as far as their business is concerned. We can't sort everything out, but I think business needs to play its role.
Right. We will get to questions in just a bit, so start thinking about them. I'm curious, at this stage in the Brexit process, there are still so many unknowns. I'm wondering, when you talk to business leaders, what are their top priorities at the moment when they're looking to March 2019?
It's interesting because on the one level, what keeps London competitive is terrifically complex, and what kind of is at stake in the Brexit negotiations is terrifically complex. But at another level, it's amazing how simple the message has come out from business. Very diverse business, from construction through to banking and hospitality and everything in between. And they all say the same thing: it is talent. They say, Jasmine, I can actually, with my business, I can deal with whatever customs union or not that we get, whatever kind of arrangement, as long as I can continue to attract and retain the kind of talent that I need in my business. And that includes both the kind of so-called high-pay, high-skill talent and fixing the kind of broken visa system that we've got at the moment. We've been hearing a lot about doctors, essential workers, essential people being turned away. But also, it's talking about the shortage occupations. So, some of our businesses are in property or construction. We have a shortage of 13,000 open positions in the construction sector in London today, and that's before the end of freedom of movement. So that's their big focus is on talent. Can they get the people that they need, both from around the world, but also they're willing to step up and do more, and many of them are doing a lot, but do more on the skills side and skilling up people who are born in the UK. Right.
I mean, the government is really, driving this and deciding what it's going to look like, what the UK will look like after Brexit. But I am wondering what businesses, given that uncertainty, what they can do now, maybe on the talent side in particular, to prepare, even with sort of all the unknowns.
Yeah. Well, actually, by good coincidence, today London First is launching the results of our Skills Commission, which was chaired by our chairman, John Allen, who's the chairman of Tesco's and Barrett's, and actually the incoming, he's stepping down from us and becoming the next chairman of the CBI here in the UK. And we're launching the set of recommendations from our Skills Commission, which studied over the last year what business sees as the jobs that they need to fill by 2026. And to the extent that that can be predicted, there were some interesting talks this morning, and how business can step up to do more and dovetail better with skills providers, and what business would recommend that government does differently. So, for example, one of our top recommendations, I think we're in the Telegraph this morning, on how the government needs to reform the apprenticeship levy to make that really work and ensure that there are more apprenticeships offered by business in London and around the UK.
Right. Do we have some questions in the audience for Jasmine? No? Not yet? Okay. One of the things we talked about a little bit about this a little bit last night, about one of your more controversial positions that I'm curious to see how it goes over in this room. You said that you don't really believe in role models. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say, I can't remember in what context, but I'm often asked, who's your role model? And I don't have one or two specific role models. I mean, obviously, I've been inspired by a lot of great people along the way. I've had some great experiences. Some of those people were just, really, I was inspired by their compassion and by their human kind of way of coping with their challenges. So I'm thinking of a wonderful woman in Uganda that I met many years ago called Mariam, who was severely disabled, and she was caring for her one-year-old daughter in exactly the same way as we would all want to care for our one-year-old daughter, but obviously because of her disability, it was a huge amount of work. So I just found that very inspiring. So there's also great leaders who've inspired me, but I suppose I was brought up to believe that we're all just humans, and we're all equal, and we all should have the same rights. And if you put somebody up on a pedestal, that's a dangerous thing to do for all concerned. And I guess I was taught to have confidence in my own decisions and not to try and compare myself with others, which inevitably, I think, is always going to be slightly daunting when you do that. So for me, that's actually given me a huge amount of confidence.
Mm-hmm. And do you encourage people on your team to sort of take that same approach?
I think everybody's different. So what I do encourage everybody to do is think about their own personal development. So I've got quite a small team now at London First, 40 people, but I've said, everybody here should be thinking about their own development, and we will support you in doing that, and you need to take some responsibility in doing that. I really believe in continuous learning.
Right. Do we have any questions from the audience? You mentioned your team. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Jasmine.
Hi, Anna.
I'm interested in a slightly different question, which is about, you've had a very successful career in a very major global charity. And a lot of those charities are run by women. I think a lot of the bigger charities have more women as CEOs in them than not. I have a sense that many men in organisations see charities as not as challenging as business organisations to run, whereas in fact they're often far more challenging than business organisations to run. And I'd just like to understand your insights and perspective on that, whether charities get downgraded, and if so, what we should be doing about it.
Yes, really good question and observation. That's certainly the case, and in the end I just sort of had to get over it, because it was very frustrating throughout my time, running. I mean, Save the Children was a $2 billion operation across 100 countries with about 25,000 people. We were obviously operating in life and death situations. We had any number of kind of crisis management teams standing at any one time, and we had to deliver the business, and we were raising those funds and spending them every year. We didn't have an endowment. So hugely challenging, and the thing that I took on in my second sort of chapter at Save the Children International was actually bringing together all of the different Save the Children's around the world, a very complex kind of merger process. I mentioned Freshfields was supporting with that, and I remember meeting with the senior partner at Freshfields early on when I took on that role, and she said, Jasmine, I have never, in all my M&A experience, I have never seen anything as complex as what you are trying to do. I think she thought we were crazy. I think we probably were, but anyway, we did do it. We did pull it off, and in that process, I did manage to attract quite a lot of great talent from the private sector to come in, and my CFO came from SAB Miller. My people officer was from one of the big pharmaceutical organizations. So, and actually some people would come in from the private sector and then leave again pretty quickly, because they thought that this was going to be a kind of a, place to not have to work quite as crazy hours and kind of get more of a work-life balance, and they could see more of their kids. And I mean, I don't want to boast about the fact that it was hard work, but it was just like, as Orna says, just like any other business. And it's true that people don't tend to realize that. And despite all my best efforts, I think that really hasn't changed very much. The more people move from one sector to another, I think the more that will be overcome. I'm quite passionate about that.
Well, you're the perfect example of that, and thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time, but thank you to Jasmine. Really appreciate you having a few words with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks.